I am Dr. John Padfield. I'm a business professor and a former Indiana state representative. And this is Business Reform, where I discuss issues at the intersection of business, health, and the environment. This video is especially important to me. Number one, it's about an important topic. Number two, it's about a big story that took place on September 28th, 2022, although there's a very good chance you've never heard of it yet. And number three, the company at the center of this story is to be applauded for their integrity, for their courage, and for their decisive action to correct a problem that, had it gone unchecked, could result in negative consequences around the world for the next 2 generations. The company I am talking about is the publishing company Hindawi. Hindawi is based in Egypt, but it was purchased in 2021 by the American publishing company John Wiley & Sons. John Wiley & Sons, commonly known as Wiley, is one of the largest publishers of college textbooks in the world, and they are especially well known for their medical and scientific textbooks. Hindawi is one of the world's largest fully open access academic journal publishers. Hindawi publishes over 230 peer-reviewed scientific journals on a wide variety of medical and technical subjects, including advances in cell and gene therapy, advances in pharmacological and pharmaceutical sciences, advances in virology, advances in public health, the Journal of Environmental and Public Health, and over 225 other journals. I want to stop for just a moment and explain what peer-reviewed means. When a person or a team has been conducting research, they reach a conclusion, they write an article to publicize what they have been doing, and they submit that article to a publisher for review. The publisher then recruits a small group of peer reviewers. These reviewers are often university professors who are recognized for their knowledge in the subject matter of the article under review. It is the job of the peer reviewers to carefully read the methodology, study the raw data that was collected, review the analysis of that data, and then examine the results and assess the conclusions contained in the submitted article to make sure the conclusions are supported by the data and the analysis. The job of the peer reviewer is to ensure the integrity of the research and protect the reputation of the publisher by either suggesting edits to or completely rejecting articles that contain errors, use poor methodology, or possibly used a biased sample. A common problem with articles is when authors overstate their results. An example of overstating results would be a study in which a nutritional supplement is given to 12 college-age, healthy male athletes, and because it seems to help their athletic performance without causing any medical problems, the researcher concludes the nutritional supplement would be safe and effective for everyone. While that nutritional supplement may be helpful to a 65-year-old man with chemical dependency and liver disease, because no such person was a part of the study, there would not be anything in the study to suggest that that supplement would be safe and effective for that group of people. Or theoretically, another example of overstating results might involve studying the effects of giving a vaccine booster to 8 mice and then concluding that booster is safe and effective for all humans. I couldn't have made that last example up if I tried. While I have never been a peer reviewer for Hindawi, I have a PhD from an R1 research university, and I have served several times as a peer reviewer for another publisher, so I am speaking from firsthand experience about the role of a peer reviewer. Peer-reviewed journals are considered the gold standard in scientific research, and the peer review process is of monumental importance in maintaining the integrity of academic and scientific research. That is what makes what Hindawi just did of such significance. On September 28, 2022, Hindawi announced on their website they are retracting 511 papers published in 16 of their journals since August 2020. In June of 2020, the Hindawi Research Integrity Team identified irregularities in the peer review process in a small number of journals by leveraging new analytical capabilities underlying the reviewer activity database. Hindawi goes on to say that they spotted suspicious activity, and when they began investigating, they found unethical activity among some of the peer reviewers. They also stated, quote, "As our investigation progresses, we anticipate more retractions." I want to make it perfectly clear. I am in no way mocking this incident or trying to portray Hindawi in a bad light. Just the opposite. I absolutely applaud what they have done. They are a role model of integrity. With that said, I did an internet search using both DuckDuckGo, my preferred search engine, and Google in an attempt to find any mainstream media coverage of this story. I could not find a single mention of this story on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, ABC, NBC, CBS, New York Times, Washington Post, etc. Not a single word from any of them. By the way, if you're wondering how I found out about this story, I get my news from multiple sources, one of which is a paid subscription to the Epoch Times. The Epoch Times is the only media outlet I have seen who covered this story, and I have placed a link to their website in the show notes. The reason I am so passionate about this topic is because peer-reviewed research and academic journals are the building blocks of future research. For the past couple of years, we have repeatedly been told by politicians, celebrities, media figures that we need to follow the science, as if science is something carried down from a mountaintop written on stone tablets. It is not. Science is discovered little by humans who are sometimes lazy, sloppy, mistaken, or who may have conflicts of interest. Papers based on poor research methodologies or biased conclusions that get published today can shape both public policy and future research for generations to come. One of the hallmarks of real science is it's repeatable. If someone conducts an experiment and they publish their methodology and their results, someone else should be able to take that article and go out and replicate it. They should be able to perform that same experiment and they should be able to get the same results. If the results cannot be duplicated, that casts a large shadow of doubt over the original experiment and the original conclusions. I am a big believer in science, but real science takes time. Real science is not subject to politics. Real science is not democratic. It does not depend upon what the majority of scientists believe about something. Real science is based on evidence. What appears to have happened in Hindawi's case is that some reviewers and editors colluded and formed what are called review rings, where they collude and they pass papers that do not meet the academic standards that are normally required for publication. These peer review rings often involve researchers who are personal friends with one another or who have some other overlapping interests together, and they give each other a free pass to help things get through the peer review system. Why would someone participate in a peer review ring? There could be many reasons. If the person is a professor, professors are required to get articles published for tenure and for promotion. If the researcher is not a professor, they may still need to get published in order to keep the funds coming for their research. Still, other researchers may have an agenda they want to promote, or they may have a conflict of interest that is dependent upon publishing results. At least 511 peer-reviewed articles are being retracted by Hindawi, but don't think for a moment that this issue is just a Hindawi issue. Corrupted science goes far beyond Hindawi. Retraction Watch is a not-for-profit organization that watches scientific and medical journals, and they note and document whenever something is retracted. Recently, Retraction Watch has published articles about a number of different publishers that have had problems and had to issue retractions. The Institute of Physics recently announced it was retracting 494 papers. Sage Publications is retracting 60 papers over a peer review and citation ring, and PLOS1 is retracting over 100 papers because of a rigged peer review process. And I previously mentioned politicians, celebrities, and media figures who constantly told us to
follow the gourd, the holy gourd of Jerusalem!
No, not the holy gourd of Jerusalem. They told us, follow the science. So let's just see where the COVID-19 science would have led us if we followed all of that science. Well, according to an article in the Journal of Nanoparticle Research, oh, wait a minute, that COVID article's been retracted. Let's try another. According to an article in the Journal of Pharmacy and Bioallied Sciences, oh wait, that COVID article's also been retracted. Well, there's an article about COVID in the journal Computers and Biology and Medicine that, no wait, that one's been retracted too. Well, here's one from the Journal of Infection and Public Health. Oops. looks like that one's been retracted too. Here's a good one. The New England Journal of Medicine reported, what's that say? It's about cardiovascular disease, drug therapy, and mortality in COVID-19, but what's that red bar say? This article has been retracted. I think you get the point. As of the date of this recording, October 18th, 2022, Retraction Watch has documented 265 COVID articles that have been retracted. This slide just shows the first 25 of a very, very long list. That is 265 pieces of peer-reviewed science that we were supposed to follow that have all been retracted. Again, I am not anti-science. I am anti-junk science. I earned my PhD in technology leadership and innovation, and I know how to conduct legitimate scientific research. I have served as the graduate committee chairman for several doctoral students at a R1 research university. I am a huge believer in real science. I just haven't seen much of it in the media or coming out of the mouths of politicians in the last couple of years. If you think corrupted science is bad, wait till you see my next video on corrupted evidence. It turns out publishers aren't the only institutions plagued by unethical conduct, fraud, and pseudoscience. In my next video, I will discuss several major crime lab scandals that put false evidence in front of jurors in tens of thousands of criminal cases and sent innocent people to prison. Subscribe and turn on notifications to make sure you are notified when I publish new videos.
I reviewed a paper about COVID-19 on this channel that has been retracted. We're going to talk about what that paper was reviewing and why they took it down. So let me set the stage that this paper wasn't just an opinion paper about COVID-19. It was a 38-page, scientifically referenced paper reviewing the process of COVID-19 and the effects or side effects of COVID-19. It was cross-referenced with nearly 300 scientific articles, and there were 8 peer reviewers for this article. That means there were 8 scientists, not chosen by the authors, who reviewed the article, asked questions about the article, and all 8 signed off that this was a scientifically based, peer-reviewed article about COVID-19 and the processes over the last 3 years. All right, so we're first going to look at what went wrong with rolling out this vaccination and setting up a trial during such a time as a pandemic. And then we're going to look at the effects from the vaccination. So let's start here with the approval process. The first step that I like to land on, and the paper does as well, is to look at what is that pre-EUA, or Emergency Use Act, that we used to get this vaccination to the public, as well as what bias might have been present. In the first section of the paper, it talks about how prior to this rapid authorization process, no vaccine had been permitted to use without the release undergoing testing for at least 4 years. The bias that was mentioned in the first section of this paper includes that both political and financial commitment that the government had committing to the purchase of, millions of dollars of this mRNA vaccination, and how that might have led to their need for this to turn out okay. The next thing the paper points out is the reclassification of the word vaccinations. So the paper points out that we've used the word vaccination, for at least 100 years in our medical communities. And that word meant something. But this was strikingly different than what a vaccination was. This process was a messenger RNA that was really the manipulation of how our proteins could be made intracellularly after the inoculation with this string of messenger RNA. So to recap, if you've never heard of messenger RNA before this vaccination, you have that in your body. And your body will make messenger RNA out of the DNA in your nucleus, in each of your cells. From that messenger RNA, you then make proteins. So this is where we said if we make these proteins, it will help to fight against and maybe even prevent the spread of a virus. At least that was the theory behind this testing of messenger RNA. The key component here is it's not a vaccination. It's not the same thing. And there isn't an off switch when you have messenger RNA in circulation. Well, how do you get the protein to stop being made? well, that was never talked about and really wasn't covered. Number 3 is the inadequate safety testing and approval process. So again, this was a pandemic. This was something we'd never seen before, and if you are a frontline clinician like me, you had lots of forgiveness for how they were testing and seeing if this process was going to prevent the spread or the infection. Until I looked at this paper, which pointed out that the recruitment for the people they were studying was a lot younger than what was actually being seen in my clinic. So when looking for the severe cases, the Pfizer arm of the trial only had one that was a severe COVID case, and the Moderna had 0. That is a misrepresentation of what we were actually using this for in real practice. I think it's really important that the math that was used to determine is this vaccination effective for the population was only a 20-week trial. So in those 20 weeks, it would be very important that the audience we're looking at are the ones that, well, we are seeing die from this infection. At the end of those 20 weeks, I think 2 things are very curious. Number 1, at the end of 20 weeks, the people who got placebo were offered the vaccination. So as we study them for the next year later, any side effect that was found in the placebo, well, it's missing because they ended up with the vaccination, or at least they were offered the vaccination. The second part was the numbers were way too small to be able to make a clear, or at least a pragmatic conclusion that this vaccination was doing what the trial was intended to look for. This next paragraph looks at the implication for whether or not it reached the 50% relative risk reduction when given the vaccination. This gets a little complicated when you see that there were a percentage of patients with confirmed PCR registered COVID-19. Yet there was a large number, a 20-fold increase of people who had suspected COVID-19. So when you take into account this 20-fold increase, there were almost 1,600 cases in the vaccinated group, 1,800 in the placebo group. And when you factored in both this confirmed with PCR as well as suspected cases, the vaccine efficacy against developing symptoms drops to only 19%, far below the 50% relative risk reduction threshold required by the regulatory authorization. So finally, let's get to the underreporting. It says, moreover, the original trial reports did not include data on serious non-infectious events, including fatalities, that occurred between the 30 and 60-day reporting period. By contrast, the COVID-19 infections were continuously monitored from the time of immunization. Both Pfizer and Janssen showed leniency in recording the adverse events, restricting the documentation of solicited events to a safety cohort representing less than 20% of the overall study population. This next section starts with the word alarmingly, and it really is. It was drawing from this 6-month interim report where Michaels and colleagues found evidence of substantial increase in the number of deaths due to cardiovascular events from this vaccinated subject, and it was not reported by that manufacturer. So this paper points out that the protocol was very clear, that a serious adverse effect, meaning death and hospitalization, but you had 24 hours to report this death. And the guidelines were not ambiguous, but Pfizer used the dates that the death was recorded in the subject's case report forms, as opposed to the death dates, which was Pfizer maintained. This investigation uncovered the consistent pattern of reporting the delays of the date of death on subjects' case report forms across the entire trial. And remember, this is a 20-week area we are studying. So any delay in deaths would be an underreporting of mortality, which is what this says. If Pfizer had used the actual death dates in their emergency use application, 2 additional vaccination subjects would have been included in the application. This discrepancy was crucial. All vaccinated subjects, 4 of 4, and half of the placebo deaths, 2 of 4, were cardiac related. Here was another finding that I spent a lot of time scratching my head about. It was a quality control and process related impurities. So let's review that when you apply to use a vaccination, you had to submit the actual vials to the authorities. And in those vials were found the messenger RNA that is this vaccination. However, when they went to replicating this process in mass quantities after the approval, they used a different process. One that was accidentally leaving double-stranded DNA, not the single-stranded mRNA that was approved, but snippets of double-stranded DNA found throughout the process, throughout these vials. Those processes, from the biases to the impurities, are part of what we said yes to during a pandemic. And we were trusting that these authorities and those researchers were going to keep us well informed on whether or not, as we move forward, the process was safe. So the adverse effects are what we're going to look at next. And this is where those processes blend into some of the findings that this paper points out. Let's begin with the increased autoimmune disorders. Let's start with this highlighted sentence, which looks at the 803% increase in the autoimmune disorders. So when you take that finding of the increased autoimmune disorders, and then you add this, other components of the vaccine contributed to complex, poorly understood, and unpredictable adverse effects. These components included the lipid nanoparticles and in particular, the ionized cation lipids and the polyethylene glycol, and various process-related impurities such as the DNA plasmids discussed previously. So let me just outline this a little bit. When you look at autoimmune disorders, when they are activated inside the body, it's because the immune system did an accident. It made an error, and it is thinking that self isn't self. One of the ways to activate the inappropriate attacking of yourself, the autoimmune disorder, is to have, erroneous DNA floating around your body after a vaccination. It is very unsettling to read how prevalent the impurities were, and then my brain says, I wonder if that is a correlation to how many of them have these autoimmune disorders after the vaccination. All right, let's move on to the cardiotoxicities and the myocarditis. This has been all over the news, so I was particularly curious when reading this section. All right, the paper points out there is a large and growing literature describing the remarkable toxic effects of the S protein. Its persistence for up to 30 days following the vaccination is of great concern. The S protein causes an acute inflammatory response. And of course, you skip down to find that the COVID-19 mRNA vaccination, particularly in young adults, many studies have found increased risk of myocarditis, or swelling in those muscle cells of your heart, along with cardiac arrhythmias, and some cases leading to sudden death. This S protein persists in circulation in the young adults who developed myocarditis post-vaccination, but not in vaccinated individuals who did not develop myocarditis. It goes on to talk about how that prevalence seems to be a lot higher in those that were vaccinated versus those who just got the infection. All right, so that was the paper. So why did it get retracted? Let's take a look at the email that the authors got from the advisors who run that paper. Okay, so it says, "Dear authors," and it goes on to say, here are 8 reasons we think this paper should be retracted. Notice the underlining in blue that says, yeah, we don't think that there's any correction you can make that will stop us from retracting it. As you look at these 8 points, starting with the misrepresentation of the all-cause mortality, of the vaccination adverse offense reporting data, it goes on to talk about the math used to predict whether or not the claims of the vaccination were convincing evidence or not. And you can read through the rest of these. As I read through them, I thought, well, for sure, we can continue the debate. If there is a problem with any of these, let's make sure we don't shut off the conversation. Dr. McCullough, the senior author of this very advanced report, has written a rebuttal showing, well, here's our citations for how he came up with that information and why they would like to argue their point. The report is helpful for me, but I will save you the pain of having me go through line by line of his report. I do want to read one sentence. It's this irredeemable statement that bothers me. It says, the article states that the mRNA COVID-19 vaccination did not undergo adequate safety and efficacy testing, which the journal considers to be incorrect. You're like, that's the reason you can't? I love his response to this. He says, in summary, the idea that the mRNA COVID vaccine 19 did not undergo adequate safety and efficacy testing is the central premise to the paper. It was the basis for the paper considered by Curious in the first place, and then eventually accepting the following an exhaustive, lengthy review process. The fact that you are making this statement suggests that he and his Springer superiors are overriding the Curious editors in the matter, and it is the point where when you see the authorities stopping the scientific discourse, how are people like me on the front end supposed to make a decision? It is this kind of discussion that is needed, and I would love to see this continue played out in the scientific articles that are not regulated by the political games being played here. All right, so this isn't normally what I do on this channel. I spend time educating people on how to get the best metabolism so when things like a pandemic come on again, you are the healthiest that you can be. It is not my intention to focus on this vaccination any further. What I do on this channel is to try and educate my patients and all of you that are curious about how do you get the best metabolism, the best metabolic health, so that a virus as wimpy as something like COVID-19 can be fought off with success. So if you want to see one of my favorite videos, it is telling you whether or not you're insulin resistant. Don't know what that is? Check out the video. I got you.